Okay, so for the assignment drawing a chair in negative space, I've got the picture of the chair from in your workbook, and I have my sketchbook beside me, and it already has a toned ground, so make sure you do that because that's really going to help you in the end when you start erasing your negative space, and then your chair will really come to life here. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use our plastic picture plane again, and we're just going to draw a negative space in here. Any negative space you want is fine, but this one in here is a nice one. It's a good size that we can compare other things to. So you can see we've drawn that on the picture plane. That's going to help us. We're going to take that and transfer that negative space over onto the drawing. Make sure you're using the crosshairs in your picture as a reference point for how high, how far, the proportions of your negative space drawing. So we're going to go in here, and now we're going to transfer that negative space onto our drawing. Once you have your basic unit there, you can start measuring everything to that unit. You know, how long is something compared to that first unit you have? How wide is it compared to that first unit, that first negative space you have? But again, you also have your crosshairs in there as well. So when I continue on, I don't want to work with those small little negative spaces in the back of the chair. I think that would just be a bit frustrating at first, and if we got those wrong, then it's going to put off the whole chair, and they're kind of fiddly. So we're going to work with the rest of it first. So what I'm doing is I'm often referring to where are the angles and the shapes according to those crosshairs as well. So I'm going in there and I'm measuring, okay, how long down is that seat? Okay, it's about, you know, the tip of my pencil, so make sure that I bring that down the appropriate length in there. And your pencil is often better than a ruler, because usually when you're drawing you don't have your ruler out, and you can hold your pencil up when you're referring to, you know, drawing something that's far away as well as your reference point. So here I'm also I'm going to make a mark on there for how high up about is that leg on there. If you make little marks like that for how high up the legs are, where about they should be, then you can really start filling in with the negative space beyond that. And then you'll find you get your proportions right, and your chair, it doesn't end up squished or stretched out because you've got those little markers on there. You've got those little ticks everywhere as you go. When you're drawing, you're always comparing things to horizontal as well. Like, what's the angle? So if I'm looking at this seat, what's the angle of that seat compared to horizontal? So maybe it's about, I don't know, is it about a 15 degree angle, 10-degree angle, but it's certainly not a horizontal seat. So when I do that, when I'm drawing that part, I want to make sure I've got my angle correct as well. And so I'm just marking where my negative space would be, and that there is sort of that angle from that first negative space to the second negative space. Then I'm going to go in there, and if I'm really unsure about the negative space, you can go in and draw more negative space on your plastic picture plane. Eventually you'll need to use it less and less, but it's a great tool to be using to just see what is the shape that you're drawing. Where is it in relation to the other negative space? How far apart are those two negative spaces? So you can see if I work in this way with the back of the chair, I'm not working with that intricate detailed work with the negative space at this point. I'm just going to work with the larger negative spaces on there. So I have drawn the second negative space in there for me just for reference, and then I'll go in there, and again I'm sort of looking at angles. What is that angle of that negative space in there? Does it go straight up, or does it angle back a little bit? And I'm always doing those little bits of references and checking as you go. You know, when you draw something, people don't just sit down and draw and it works out perfect. You're always comparing and looking at the proportions of it, the relation of one line to another line. And then as you do that, the drawing comes together. So we're going to continue doing that with all of our negative space for the rest of this picture. Another one of the things you're going to be looking at is the negative space between the legs. So I put a little marker as to how far down that back leg comes, but then I noticed the negative space right in between those two legs, and that's what I want to draw. So just to emphasize it here for you, I'm just going to outline it on that plastic picture plane, that shape that occurs in there. right? So you can see, I don't know, it looks a little bit like an R, but you're trying not necessarily to name things, but you are looking at the negative space in there. So that's the negative space that I'm going to draw. Rather than saying I'm drawing the front leg, I'm drawing the back leg, you're drawing that space in between. You're drawing the nothing in there. And so that's what you're going to keep referring to, and how close is that negative space? How far is it? How far down does that negative space come from the crosshair lines? You're constantly comparing and referring and looking at your negative space. Once you've finished drawing all your negative space in there and you're happy with the way that the picture has turned out, you can go in with your eraser and erase all of that negative space in the background of the chair. I didn't tone my ground very dark, so my paper, what I erase isn't real dark, but yours might be a little bit darker. It entirely depends on how dark you shaded it to begin with. But you can go in there and start erasing all of that background in there, and then you can add in, you can go over some of those lines if you want to emphasize the lines a little bit more, if you want to clean up your negative space at the back of the chair. You'll see as I get going, when I start erasing all the tiny little spaces in the back of the chair, I do end up taking out some of my lines, so I go back in there and I end up fixing some of those lines in there. But if you start erasing that negative space and perhaps adding a little bit of shadow into your chair and just adjusting and cleaning up some of your lines, yeah, I'm sure you'll be happy with the end result of your picture. As with every drawing you do, don't forget to sign and date the bottom of all of your drawings. And if you're curious, you can go back and you can take your plastic picture plane where you drew your negative spaces and maybe made some reference points on there. And if you want, just go right ahead and take that in and lay it over top of your chair and see how did you do when you using the negative spaces. How did you do with your proportion and using your crosshairs to see how everything went. If you do that, you can lay it over top and see, and I'm sure you'll be happy with the way things turned out in the end.